Freddie Mercury, the legendary frontman of Queen, has a secret daughter, a revelation that has emerged from a new biography titled
Placed a worn leather folder on the desk. Inside were 17 handwritten diaries, private letters, decades-old photographs, and what she claimed was DNA evidence, all pointing to one explosive truth. "I am Freddie Mercury's biological daughter," she said. No one had ever heard of her. Not a single newspaper had printed her name. Yet there she stood, a quiet professional working in the medical field, holding documents that would soon ignite a firestorm across the music world. What followed wasn't a press conference. It wasn't a scandal driven by fame or fortune. It was the slow unraveling of a story that had stayed hidden for nearly 30 years. A story that called into question everything we thought we knew about one of rock music's most iconic legends. Her name is B. No last name, no stage name, just B. A woman in her late 30s living somewhere in Europe, far from the lights and sound of the concert stages that once defined her alleged father's world. For years, she remained invisible, but in 2025, she chose to step forward, not to make headlines, but to reclaim a story that had been buried in silence. According to B, she is the biological daughter of Freddie Mercury, the legendary frontman of Queen. Not adopted, not a distant cousin, his child. And to support her claim, she brought with her not just words, but evidence. Mercury's private diaries, letters written in his unmistakable hand, candid photographs, and confidential financial records never before seen by the public. It wasn't a loud announcement. There were no cameras, no press tours. B's approach was discreet. She reached out to someone who knew the Mercury story intimately, journalist and biographer Leslie Ann Jones. Jones had written extensively on Mercury's life, but even she, a woman who had heard every rumor and chased down every lead for decades, was not prepared for what B was about to present. What began as a quiet meeting would soon become the center of one of the most provocative questions ever posed about Freddie Mercury's legacy. And at the center of it all was a name: B. When B contacted Leslie Ann Jones, the timing couldn't have been more fragile. Jones had spent over 3 decades chronicling the life of Freddie Mercury through interviews, memoirs, and personal recollections. She had been there when the tributes poured in after his death. She had spoken to bandmates, friends, even lovers. She thought she had heard it all. So when an unknown woman claimed to be Mercury's daughter, Jones's first instinct was professional caution. She had been pitched sensational claims before, most of them baseless, many of them self-serving. But this time, something was different. It started with the notebooks, 17 volumes, thick with wear, their pages inked in a hand Jones recognized instantly. Not generic journal entries, but raw, emotionally charged writing. Pages filled with grief, reflection, anger, and, most notably, recurring references to a child, a girl, a secret he carried not with shame, but with an aching kind of pride. Each diary was dated, detailed, and personal, spanning from Mercury's early years in Zanzibar to his final days in London. They painted a private portrait of a man who had always been seen as untouchable. Among those pages were affectionate names, inside jokes, and phrases that suggested an unbreakable bond with someone the public never knew existed. Still, Jones did not leap to conclusions. She began verifying, painstakingly, handwriting analysis, cross-checking bank statements, authenticating photographic negatives. The deeper she dug, the more she found herself forced to reconsider the Freddie she thought she knew. This wasn't a scandal in the making. It was, perhaps, a final truth Mercury never wanted spoken aloud. Stacked end to end, the diaries would stretch across a table like a timeline of one man's hidden life. 17 notebooks, more than 55,000 words, and every one of them in Freddie Mercury's own hand. These weren't tour journals or set list drafts. They were windows into his inner world, pages where he unraveled his thoughts without the performance, without the spotlight. They began in Zanzibar, sketching the struggles of a gifted boy in a conservative environment, and followed him through the meteoric rise of Queen, his isolation and fame, and finally his slow reckoning with illness. But what caught Leslie Ann Jones's eye was the presence of someone else, a little girl, referred to not by name, but by a string of private symbols, affectionate nicknames, and a single line that appeared again and again. "I think about her when I'm on stage." The entries were quiet, personal, no sweeping declarations, no dramatic confessions, just evidence of presence, of someone Mercury saw, wrote to, and cared for in private. Some pages included hand-drawn sketches. One depicted a small child's hand inside a larger one. Another showed two initials surrounded by a heart. These weren't metaphors, they were messages. The details were too consistent, the language too intimate, the voice too unmistakably Mercury. And if they were real, and all signs pointed that they were, they told a story he had never told in public. A story he had only ever written for her. If the diaries offered an emotional argument, the next step was scientific. According to Leslie Ann Jones, B had managed something few outside Mercury's estate ever could. She acquired a preserved personal item believed to have belonged to him. The nature of the object remains undisclosed, but it reportedly contained enough biological material to conduct a DNA analysis. She didn't go public with it. She didn't announce it to the press. Instead, she quietly submitted the sample to a reputable European genetic lab known for its discretion. Weeks later, the results came in. A match. Not a vague correlation, not a maybe. The lab confirmed that B and Mercury shared a blood relationship. But just as quickly as the test made headlines, the details vanished behind legal language. The lab refused to disclose identifying information or provide the full report, citing client confidentiality and legal constraints around estate claims involving deceased individuals. This half-confirmation only added fuel to the fire. Some saw it as proof, clear and powerful. Others called it inconclusive, pointing to the absence of an independent third-party verification. Still, in the eyes of Leslie Ann Jones, the DNA result wasn't just data, it was the final push. It was the scientific backbone to the story she had already come to believe. But in the court of public opinion, facts aren't always enough, especially when the only people who could speak for Mercury are long gone, or staying silent. As news of B's revelations slowly began to circulate among those closest to Mercury's legacy, the world waited for a response. But what followed was not a denial, it was silence. Freddie Mercury's inner circle, his bandmates, his family, his lifelong friend Mary Austin, had been fiercely protective of his image for decades. Together, they helped shape the narrative that millions of fans around the world embraced. The genius, the showman, the mystery. But if B's story was false, their voices would have been the first to correct the record. Instead, they said nothing. According to Leslie Ann Jones, this wasn't a surprise. She claims Mercury's parents, his sister Kashmira, and even bandmates Brian May and Roger Taylor had known about B for years. Mary Austin, who inherited the bulk of Mercury's estate, had allegedly been part of the original agreement to keep B's existence private. Whether this is true remains unconfirmed, but the silence in response to B's claim has only deepened public suspicion. Some believe it's a quiet acknowledgement. Others say it's a strategy. Let the story fade before it builds momentum. Still, in the world of high-stakes legacy management, silence can be louder than words, especially when those who have the most to lose choose not to speak. And while fans clung to the version of Mercury they knew, journalists and skeptics began asking a new question. If the people who knew him best aren't denying it, could it actually be true? The moment B's claim went public, the media pounced. The Guardian ran with cautious intrigue. The Telegraph leaned on emotional weight. The Daily Mail splashed the story across its pages, pairing speculation with drama. But while headlines varied, one thing remained consistent. None of the outlets had direct access to the original diaries or DNA results. Almost all were reporting secondhand, relying on Leslie Ann Jones and her inner circle of sources. And that uncertainty triggered exactly what the media thrives on: division. On social platforms, the reactions were instant and sharp. Twitter, now X, became a battlefield. Reddit threads dissected every detail, from handwriting samples to facial comparisons in old photographs. Fans debated not just whether Bee was telling the truth, but what it would mean if she was. Some stood by Bee. "If Mercury loved her in private, who are we to erase that?" one commenter posted. Others pushed back, suspicious of the timing, the lack of verifiable proof, and the involvement of Jones, a figure whose past biographies had often blurred the line between memoir and marketing. To critics, this felt too polished, too perfectly timed with the biography's release. A rollout, not a revelation. But to supporters, Bee's quiet approach and refusal to chase money made her story feel authentic. She hadn't sued, she hadn't held a press conference, she wasn't asking for royalties. She was, they argued, simply tired of being erased from a story that was partly hers. Still, in the age of viral skepticism, even silence can be spun. And in Bee's case, her low profile raised just as many questions as it answered. What emerged wasn't just a dispute over facts. It was a fracture in Mercury's legacy, one that no official statement could neatly repair. Freddie Mercury died in 1991, leaving behind a carefully structured will under British law. It was straightforward, decisive. The majority of his estate, including the famed Garden Lodge mansion and 50% of his music royalties, went to Mary Austin, his former fiancée and closest confidant. The rest was divided between his parents and his sister Kashmira. No mention of a child, no room for doubt. Legally, that seemed to settle it. But in the United Kingdom, inheritance law holds room for the unexpected. Under the 1975 Inheritance Provision for Family and Dependents Act, even illegitimate or unacknowledged children can, under certain conditions, make a claim, if they can prove both biological connection and financial dependency. There's just one catch. Those claims must be filed within 6 months of the will's execution. For Bee, more than 30 years have passed. Her legal window slammed shut decades ago. And yet, her story doesn't end with the law. According to Leslie Ann Jones, a confidential private agreement was made in the 1980s between Mercury, Bee's mother, and Bee's legal stepfather. It allegedly ensured that Bee would be financially supported through a separate trust account, hidden from the public eye. After Mercury's death, the assets from that account were quietly passed down to Bee through her stepfather. That trust, if real, may explain why Bee has never pursued Mercury's public fortune. She lives comfortably, she's never filed a claim, she hasn't asked for fame. Her decision to come forward, she says, was about silence, about breaking it, not profiting from it. And Mary Austin? She remains the gatekeeper of Mercury's estate. She hasn't commented publicly. But according to Jones, she knew the truth all along. Whether that silence is loyalty, legal caution, or something more is anyone's guess. Freddie Mercury wasn't just a rock star. He was a cultural symbol, a revolutionary voice. And for many, especially within the LGBTQ+ community, he became something more, a beacon of boldness, defiance, and unapologetic identity. So when Bee's claims surfaced, that Mercury had fathered a daughter and kept her hidden for 15 years, it shook more than just the music world. It struck at the foundation of what Mercury's legacy meant to millions. Some LGBTQ+ advocates were quick to defend Bee's story. They argued that Mercury's complex relationships with women, including Mary Austin, didn't invalidate his queer identity, but enriched it. That being a father didn't undo the legacy he left for queer communities around the globe. In their eyes, the revelation only underscored Mercury's humanity, his capacity to love across lines, his personal contradictions, his quiet loyalties. Others weren't so sure. Some feared that the claim would be misused, that it might be weaponized by those eager to downplay Mercury's role as a gay icon or reframe his identity to fit more palatable narratives in a profit-driven media landscape. In a world where legacies are repackaged and sold, one false move could mean years of hard-won visibility erased in the name of storytelling. And then there were the fans. Queen's global following, fiercely loyal, passionately protective, was split. For some, B's story offered a poignant missing piece, a final human thread to an already complicated genius. For others, it felt intrusive, suspicious, even exploitative. Debate erupted across platforms, from Reddit threads to Twitter spaces, and at the heart of it all was one uncomfortable truth. Mercury, the man, had always lived behind a curtain, and now, long after his death, the world was pulling it back, one page, one rumor, one diary at a time. In the publishing world, timing is everything, and by the time B's story surfaced, the wheels were already in motion. Leslie Ann Jones, armed with exclusive access to Mercury's private diaries, was deep into the final stages of a new biography, Love, Freddie, scheduled for release in September. At the heart of the book were the very documents B had brought forward. For the first time, Mercury's private writings were being excerpted, interpreted, and marketed for global consumption. But this wasn't just a biography, it was a campaign. Early chapters were quietly leaked to select media outlets. Limited edition print runs of annotated diary pages were released to specialty bookstores. Teasers were strategically placed in interviews, podcasts, and magazine profiles. The hook? First-time revelations. The angle? The man behind the legend, raw, real, reimagined. For publishers, B's story wasn't a risk, it was an opportunity. In an age of content overload, it offered a rare combination: the legacy of an untouchable icon mixed with the emotional charge of a personal secret, and just enough doubt to spark controversy. But it raised a deeper question. Was this about truth or traction? Mercury had once built a wall between himself and the public. Now that wall was being taken apart, not by a scandal, but a marketing plan. A carefully timed rollout designed to sell not just books, but an idea that even in death, Freddie Mercury still had something left to reveal. And for the people orchestrating it, B's claim wasn't just part of the narrative, it was the perfect entry point, shocking, nostalgic, and impossible to ignore. In a rare interview in 1985, Freddie Mercury once said, "I built a wall between myself and the rest of the world." At the time, it sounded like a metaphor for privacy. Today, it reads more like a prophecy. That wall is now gone, dismantled not by time, but by the machinery of legacy. 30 years after his death, Mercury's life is no longer his own. It belongs to the publishers, the media, the estates, the scholars, and the fans, each one pulling at a thread, each one reinterpreting the story. B's revelation, real or not, has become more than a family mystery. It is now a cultural fault line, where truth, memory, commerce, and identity collide. The dead do not have agency. They cannot clarify, correct, or contest. And in that silence, those who remain, those with the diaries, the copyrights, the platforms, become the new authors of legacy. Mercury's diaries, once locked away, are now marketing tools. His story, once his own, is now a product. And B's role? Whether she's telling the truth or chasing attention, she has become a symbol of what happens when history is no longer fixed, but fluid. In this environment, the truth arrives late. It arrives distorted. It arrives through voices that were never meant to carry it. And that leaves fans, critics, and cultural historians with a difficult question. When a legacy is contested, whose version do we believe? The one with the most evidence? The one with the most emotion? Or the one that sells the most copies?